we've got Dan Jackson from Rightmove here today. He's going to talk to us about how to improve working on your legacy applications. Just a reminder to everyone to remember to tweet at Londroid if you want to be in with a chance for winning an Android Things Kit. But apart from that, take it away, Dan.
Oh, thank you. You'll hear me in the back, yeah? Good? Sound check at the back. Everyone hear me? Yes, thank you, Tom. Cool. So I'm Dan. I'm here to talk about how to improve working on your legacy application. First of all, who am I? As I said, Dan Jackson. I am Android tech lead at Rightmove. Usually people have a Twitter handle when they do these talks. I don't use Twitter that much. It's usually for stalking celebrities, checking out football memes, or seeing what stupid thing Trump has said today. But if you want to get in contact with me, there's my email address, and I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to message me. Cool. So I thought, first of all, it makes sense to start off with what is a legacy application. So it's an application that is either obsolete or is based on technology that's become obsolete. Usually these applications have business critical functionality, so they still serve a purpose. But when people have to work on them, they find it really hard to make changes, or it's really hard to maintain them. Also, in some cases, they might not have existing business knowledge or technical knowledge within the company because the people who worked on them have moved on, or they didn't leave behind sufficient documentation. So again, it's harder to work on them. Usually when you ask someone to work on a legacy application, they usually react like this. Wait for it. So how do you go about replacing your legacy application? Well, first, one way is you can start from scratch. You can have a new application, you can have your latest tech, whatever design pattern you want, the clean architecture. The downside of that is obviously you've then got to port over all those existing functionality you have into your new application, and that can take quite a lot of time. Another option is to replace the existing legacy application, but bit by bit you move it over into new code that's got the new tech, better design patterns, better abstraction, whatever. The third way is what's known as the strangler pattern, which is copyrighted by Martin Fowler. He's the person who came up with this. And that's to have two applications. So you have a legacy application working alongside a new application. So users don't see a difference, but what's actually happening is some functionalities in the legacy, some functionality new, and you slowly move over from legacy to the new. And every time I hear someone talk about the strangler pattern, they always show this exact image, so I'm not going to break tradition. Here is the strangler pattern like in a tree. So you've got this existing tree here, which is our monolithic application. And then this tree that's growing around it is what's known as a strangler application. So slowly you start taking over with your new application. All of these approaches have their pros and cons. It all depends on what your team's like. So I'm just going to talk about what my team is and what this pattern we went for. So at Rightmove, we had an app that was first built in-house in about 2012, and I think we have some of the people who worked on it within the crowd. So got to be careful with what I say. This meant that simple everyday tasks that we can now just have a library for and we take for granted, we had to be built in-house within the app. So things like image handling, obviously we would use Picasso or Glide. That had to be built within the app. Making calls to the API, again, we'd use something like retrofit. That had to be built within the app. So some of these things were still being used to this day. The current setup of the app team as well is 2 Android and 2 iOS developers, so it's quite lean. And we also have the added benefit of looking after the backend API. So that's the service that the apps talk to get the data from different microservices or the database for the apps. And when I joined the team, I also joined alongside another developer, and we were both quite new to Android. So we didn't really have the technical knowledge to go ahead and make wide sweeping changes. We both needed to learn how to Android first. So that's why we decided the best approach for us was to slowly change things bit by bit. So that brought us on. So first of all, because we need to learn how to Android, we need to look at the code first and understand how to program an Android app. And that's the best thing you can do. is actually it taught us to learn our code base. And that once we started working on our code, we realized what the biggest blockers were to implementing new features and releasing the app. Once you find out those blockers, you then prioritize them and work through them. So I'm sure when most of you are about to start a new job, you've downloaded the app that you're about to work on, and you probably look at the UI and go, I think of ways to change this. For example, it might be the bottom nav bar. We can have that and then improve user experience. But then when you actually look at the code, you realize it's tightly coupled, there's little test coverage, and there's loads of manual steps to deploy. So you just have to rethink what's more important. So once we learned our code base, we then realized we didn't have good functional test coverage. So for us, we decided the best approach was to have this thing called Testing Tuesday, which obviously happened on a Tuesday, surprisingly. And we would just have a day where we'd work on adding UI tests, so we had that confidence in our code. You don't have to go that gung-ho, but I would recommend that if you're about to update existing functionality, make sure there's an end-to-end test there first. So obviously, before you start, you build your functional test, run it, it passes. You then make your changes to move on to new tech or abstract some bits and run your functional test again. If it passes, you know that you haven't broken anything and everything's all good from the user side. This is probably the only case where it's probably more important to have functional tests. The reason I say it, if you write unit tests and you're about to refactor code, those unit tests might change, especially if you're doing TDDs. But if you have a functional test, it will always just work. The other thing I'd recommend having in place before you start making changes is to have monitors in place. So have tools that will tell you how many crashes there are, what users are feeding back to you, what all your reviews look like, or any other business critical KPIs that you care about. Again, this is just making sure that when you make a change to an existing feature, your new tech hasn't accidentally broken everything and made things worse. To give you an idea, at Rightmove we use Crashlytics to monitor our crashes. We have Instabug to allow users to send us feedback, tell us what they think, what we can improve, whether something we suddenly change doesn't work anymore. We also have AppFollow, which is an application that sends reviews to our Slack channel, and we can just look at that and have all our reviews for iOS and Android app in the same place. For our backend API that we also look after, we use a tool called Kibana, and that stores errors and how many people are hitting our URLs. So from that, we can have graphs on information boards. We have them on like TV screens around our desks, and it shows us the error rate and the current usage. If we're about to release a new endpoint, we can set up alerts so that if the error goes over a certain threshold, it alerts us on Slack or email and we can look into it. Hopefully, when you're working on a legacy application, there'll be at least some form of design patterns or structure in how to get data shown on your app. If you're looking at it and you can see flaws in it and it doesn't really work, don't be afraid to change it. Come up with a better one, agree it with the team, and then make sure that everyone uses it going forward. I would also recommend having a naming conventions for POJO. So for example, when we call a URL, and we're going to put something on a request, we append it with the word of request so we know where it's going. If we get something back from the URL, we append it with a word of response so we know where it's coming from. This helps keep things consistent and it'll allow any new developers coming in to follow the same structure. This point is more of an ongoing thing. So there's always new patterns coming out. For example, I'm sure most people would have used MVP. And then MVLM come along, and maybe in some cases that's better. Don't be afraid to change things. If something better comes along, talk to the team, try it out. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work, you just revert back to the old design pattern, you carry on. I'd recommend having clear technical milestones. So define a clear goal. For us, as I mentioned earlier, it was improving the UI test suite. And what we did with that was we had a list of all the pages in our app. We then had like a traffic light system. So if it was red, no test, yellow, some test, green, we're all good. Once we had that, we then broke it down into those deliverable milestones. So okay, we don't have any tests for the property details page, we need to add that. We have some tests for email leave, we need to add that. And we put that into cards in an epic in Jira. And we're able to track our progress and slowly see that, yep, we're ticking things off and we're making things better. Coming from that point though, Don't try to change the world. Make sure you have one clear technical goal and work towards it. And once you've completed it, move on to the next one. It's very easy to go, we need to change all these things. But if you do little bits here and there, you don't actually really complete anything. And it gets quite demoralizing because you look back and go, what have I actually changed? We've still got these same problems. If you have less things, you're more likely to complete more. When you're looking at replacing existing functionality, ask yourself, is it better to start from scratch? So when you're making changes, you might be better off having brand new classes rather than trying to shoehorn in your new tech into existing classes. An example of this is when we were changing how we called the backend to get our saved properties and saved searches. So I tackled saved properties, my colleague tackled saved searches. We weren't changing how the information looked on the page, so my colleague decided he was going to use the existing activity as it was and just hook up the data. I decided I was going to start with a new activity so I could hook it up to the back end. When we were working through the stories, we got them out at about the same time, but when we were finding bugs, I was able to fix them quicker. He was a lot slower because his stuff had been shoehorned in and he didn't really understand how it worked. It was a lot harder to make changes where I simply just went, yep, done it, off you go. As well as that, it was easier for me to write unit tests to make sure that my stuff was working. Again, his stuff hadn't been structured in a really good unit testable way, and he's really struggled once it happened. So it's not just a case of get it out there as quick as possible. Make sure you're thinking about how you can maintain it. And when you're looking at replacing the existing functionality with better code, avoid the word refactor. Saying you're refactoring code doesn't give an insight into what you're actually changing, the reason why, and you're likely going to get pushback from the team. Instead, explain the problem with the current implementation, the solution, and the benefit. This will allow your team to be aware of why you're doing something, and if they see something similar, they know what to do because you've already tackled it. I've made this mistake myself. I said, like, yeah, I'm refactoring something, and a retro or whatever, turns out the team had no idea what I was doing all this time. Another mistake that I've made that I really want to nail home, this is important, don't forget to update your libraries. So this is easy to leave because if libraries are working fine as they are, you don't need to do anything in it, but if you change them, you could potentially break with an update, or if they've made breaking changes to the library, suddenly you've got to massively refactor your code to get it to work again, and you don't really see the benefit, it just carries on working as normal. However, they can eventually be an old tech that stops your app from being released. So this happened to me. I went to release the Rightmove app, and Google Play Store said, sorry, you can't. There's a class in here that uses this outdated security class. Search for that outdated security class, couldn't find it anywhere in my code base. So I had to go back to Google and say, because obviously when they sent me a message saying, you've got this class being used, it didn't tell me where it was being used. So I had to ask them where it was being used. And after about a week, they got back to me and said, it's in this class. And it was in the library, update the library, jobs are good, and I was able to release the app. If I've been on top of updating my libraries, wouldn't have had that problem in the first place. Also, as I'm sure you're aware, Google announced that they were going to stop running apps, or stop having apps released to the store that were on SDK 26. So if you were just leaving it on like 14 and suddenly they made this announcement, suddenly you've got a lot of work to do to try and keep on top of those things. So please remember your libraries. It's also good to note that if you remove a feature, no matter how small the usage, users will complain. So you may have a feature in the legacy app that was just there as a trial. It now no longer works, the usage is low, it's not really worth it for maintaining. You decide, let's get rid of it. That's okay, but users who use it fiercely love it, and they will tell you about it. So the best thing you can do to combat that is to have something like Instabug, where users can channel it into that feedback system rather than using something like Twitter or Review Store where they give you one store because you use that one because you remove that feature that they really love. Finally, remember, it made sense at the time. The developers who made those choices didn't do it to piss you off in the future. They did it because it seemed like the best thing that they could do. Like, you don't know what deadlines they had or whether they had a small team and had to get something out there. They were doing what they thought was the right thing to do. Just like most of you are working on applications today will be doing. and technology is constantly changing. So even if you're writing code in the best way, it's likely going to be replaced one day. So we could argue that right now we're all writing legacy code. So when you're writing things, make sure that it's easy to understand and make sure someone can replace it, because likelihood someone is going to one day. So I'll just go over the headings of the slide. So 1, learn your code base. That way you know what the blockers are, you can prioritize them and work through them. Make sure that functional tests exist. That way when you change existing functionality, you know that it still works. Have monitors in place, again, so that if you change the tech behind existing functionality, you know whether it's broken. Agree design patterns and naming conventions with your team. That way everyone's doing things consistently. Have clear technical milestones so that you know, so you can track your progress and know that you're making things better. Don't try to change the world, because you won't, and you'll only do little drips of changes. Ask yourself, is it better to start from scratch? You don't always have to use the existing classes. Sometimes you can start from new and bring the logic over. Avoid the word refactor so that people know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Don't forget to update libraries, because it will bite you in the arse. And prepare for user feedback, because they will let you know if they're not happy. And always remember, it made sense at the time. Are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you for the talk. I was wondering, how did you deal with your project owner when you want to modify the code, to improve it, and
Yeah.
you have deadlines, so it's hard to manage. So
Yep. Okay, so the question was, how did I speak to my project manager about making these changes? Yep. A lot of persuading. I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't easy. So I had to explain what the current, again, it was going back to explain what the current problem was and saying, if I don't do this, it's actually going to take X amount of time. Like we're not really saving any time in the long term, because we don't know if it works. And it actually will slow down the release cycle, because we suddenly have to concentrate manual QA and we use staged rollouts as well, and have more staged rollouts. So it was more selling on like the confidence that right now it's little pain, and then in the future we can constantly make changes to these updates. At first, he was a bit, okay, we'll see how it goes. But then once we started rolling out and we were able to quickly make changes as we were going, I think he understood it was the right thing to do.
you start at the end of a feature, for example, you're developing a feature, and then just before you start refactoring a little bit, how did you, is it a proper task, or is it like inside the flow, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so we had, the last big project we had was, like I said, replacing the get saved properties and get saved searches. So for that we had a load of tasks like broken down, so everything like be able to get it, be able to save. And when we had that, because we were rewriting it anyway, we were able to go, we're going to have this on the new, me and my colleagues sat together and went, right, this is going to be our new structure of the app. We're going to have it call this, do it this, and we have classes in this structure. So we planned it up front. That's the best way. If you've got a feature you're going to be working on, because usually when you've got a legacy one, it's quite hard to try and work out how it's doing, you can write it in that structure that you want. Does that answer your question? Thank you. James.
How do you track the amount of technical debt you have on a project?
How do I track it? Ooh, good question. We've got Solaris and some in like the backend API that says how much it, but it's sort of, some of it is you can't see the wood for the trees because it's on like Java 7, the backend API. So I already know that it's out of date in that sense. So I kind of need to get it. We've got a list of tasks that we need to do to get it up to a state that we're happy with, and once that's there, we can take a look at what else needs to change. Yes.
Can I hook into the same question?
Can you hook in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Use SonarQube.
Use SonarQube.
Yeah. And it pretty much goes back to the same question we have. How can I convince someone, especially a manager who doesn't know code or whatever,
Yeah.
show them progress? That's the easiest way. To say, here we invested 2 days, and our technical debt dropped from, I don't know, 3,500 customers to 3,400. That was progress.
Yeah. Oh, actually, my mind went a bit blank. On our Jenkins builds, we do have lint tests as well, and we've got a lint coverage report, so I can see how much, like it says, like you need to change these things, so I know that I need to work through them as well.
We also do have sonar. So we do have sonar.
We do have sonar.
Yeah, we do. Surprise!
Well, I always come to these things to learn new things. I just didn't think there would be people I work with. Are there any other questions? Oh, I'll go first.
Has it happened to you that maybe you didn't understand the code completely and you went to change it and then you realized too late, then you missed out something? Or, you know?
Not massively. There were some things I missed, like when I moved code over, I went, oh, I don't need it anymore. I didn't realize I did. Luckily, that never made it to live, as far as I'm aware. I think that was caught during QA. We were trying out the different scenarios, and then it came up and was like, that's why that's there. So that's why you need to make sure that the test coverage is there and your QA knows what he's doing, really. Yes?
How do you test your app before it goes live to the App Store?
Okay, so we have a pipeline in Jenkins. So when I make a change and push it up to, so we pull down from master, work on that, and then we push up to master and we make a change, and obviously that goes through a code review. We have unit tests, and they all run. If they pass, gets uploaded to this thing called Nexus, and that's where we upload it from Nexus to the Play Store. If it fails, obviously it doesn't do that. But if it passes, it's all good, and then it runs functional tests on a device that we've got attached to our. We use a Mac Pro to run our functional tests, so we use it as like a server, and it runs on there. And again, if it passes, we can upload our app. If it doesn't, we need to fix them. We're currently looking at how we can run those functional tests across multiple devices. We also have a QA who tests all the features, and he has an automation suite of tests. So when we say this app is ready to go, he runs this automation suite against it, which is like a regression, which was originally a regression pack that someone would manually do. We've now turned it into tests. So when we're ready to deploy, he'll run those automation tests as a final sanity check, and if it's good to go, we then push it to our beta users. If it looks all good, and we use Crashlytics and Instabug to keep an eye track on what our users are doing. So if we see any new bugs or crashes appear, it's likelihood that we've introduced them and that they're only going to multiply when we start pushing out more. So we fix them. If it all looks good, then we do a stage rollout that usually starts about 1%, 5%, 25, 50, and 100. And all that time we're monitoring how we're doing the app. So fairly certain that about 20% we're all good. And we do actually catch a lot of bugs that way. I think there was a question over here.
It was related to that. Maybe like how often do you run your tests, and especially your functional ones, and how long do they take to run?
Our functional tests take 20 minutes. So every time we make a change to master, they'll build. Are there any more questions? No. Thanks for listening, guys. You've been great.
So while Francesco's setting up with the raffle, I've got a quick game to play with everyone. If you have ever given a talk